Good evening, I'm Diana Skaya and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. It is the youngest country in Europe. Since declaring independence in 2008, Kosovo, a former province of Serbia, has had 6 governments and 5 prime ministers. And the polls have just closed for the country's latest parliamentary elections. Who will form the new government? We'll find out shortly, but first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Trump speaks to Putin. How many times? It's better not to say, the US president responds. Symbolic day of independence for the Baltic states. They join the European energy network, breaking away from Russia. And young Polish athletes set off for the Winter Olympic Festival in Georgia. And we begin in Kosovo this evening, where voters have officially cast their ballots in the country's parliamentary elections. Now, they elected 120 members to the 8th parliament in the country's short history, which began in 2008 when Kosovo declared independence from Serbia. Our Balkans correspondent Pavel Czaskovsky is on site. Good evening, Pavel. So take us through the latest exit poll results.
Well, no major surprises. This is how one can summarize the results of today's parliamentary elections in Kosovo. The current governing party, the Vetevendosje, won. However, it scored around 40% of the votes, about 10% less than 4 years ago, when it won in a landslide and secured a majority government that allowed them to rule independently. This year, they are looking to forming a coalition government with probably one of the parties that scored around 20% of the votes, the Democratic League of Kosovo or the Democratic Party of Kosovo. Both parties are leaning more to the right than the socially oriented Vetevendosje. However, both are potential coalition partners.
Pavel, what was the voter turnout? Tell us about that.
Well, the voter turnout is a bit lower than it was expected. It was about 40%, and the result does not agree with the perception that I had during my stay here in Kosovo. I attended 3 major political rallies, which were full of crowds of people who presented their political affiliation and political endorsement very openly. They were waving flags, they were wearing campaign T-shirts, they were being very loud and very vocal about who they would like to vote for. Also, I saw many buses with people from all over the Kosovan diaspora who came here to vote here. I also attended today the voting stations with both the Prime Minister and the President of Kosovo voted, and having cast their vote, they both encouraged Kosovans to do the same. I would actually like you to listen to what they had to say during these occasions.
Everything is important in these elections. Kosovo is the most established and the strongest democracy in the region. We need to keep it that way, and we will work hard to develop it even further.
For the first ever regular parliamentary elections in independent state of Kosovo, I thank all the citizens who have already casted their vote, and I encourage every citizen to vote.
Whatever the coalition government will look like, it is unlikely it will change the geopolitical and international orientation of Kosovo, because Kosovo is the most pro-Western and pro-European country in Europe, and this is because in 1999, when the Kosovo War started, it was the US-led NATO intervention that forced the Serbs out of Kosovo and paved the way for Kosovan independence. And Kosovans, when asked about whether the country should join NATO, should join the EU, they predominantly say yes. Actually, in a poll released last year, more than 90% of citizens of Kosovo said they would like to join the EU, and the country has actually filed the accession documents 3 years ago. However, the path to EU accession is long and bumpy, and the main obstacle is the fact that not all EU countries actually recognize Kosovo as an independent state. Back to you, Diana.
Thank you so much, Pavel. We will be coming back to you throughout the evening for as the results keep rolling in. Pavel Czaskovsky coming to us from Kosovo. The chains of power lines linking you to hostile neighbors are a thing of the past. This is freedom from threat, said Ursula von der Leyen in Vilnius today as Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia were integrated into the European energy grid. Now, this milestone marks another significant move by EU members to reduce their reliance on Russian energy supplies. Our Marek Steele has the next report.
After decoupling from the Russian energy grid on Saturday, the Baltic states have now been connected to Europe.
Moments ago, I received great news. The synchronization of the Baltic states' electricity system with the continental European system has been successfully completed.
We did it. It took us some time, it took us some effort, but we did it. And I think that we are closing one chapter in our history and we are opening a new one.
It is the final step towards emancipation from the post-Soviet sphere of dependence, in this case in the energy sector. It is also an important day for Poland, since we serve as a bridge between the Baltic states and the rest of Europe.
Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia are former Soviet republics. They had been highly dependent on supplies from Russia up until the invasion of Ukraine. Until Saturday, they relied on the Russian grid to stabilize the network and avoid outages.
There has been quite a successful information campaign in all three Baltic states to explain people how important it is, and that the prices, for example, in Latvia this year will not change.
Subsequent investments in links to the Baltic's allies made it possible to decouple from Russia. Connectors were built in the sea and on the land. The Baltic states now face the challenge of securing these links.
In just 2 months, several cables linking your countries to neighbors have been damaged. There's a pattern, and we cannot ignore it.
The threat to underwater infrastructure in the Baltic reached a critical point after a number of underwater links were found to have been allegedly severed by Russian shadow fleet vessels. Experts and policymakers from the Baltic states then warned that the suspicious incidents could have been deliberate and aimed at disrupting the planned decoupling from the Russian energy grid.
The Baltic states are very concerned about their own security, and they believe that Russia's war in Ukraine is not going to stay there, and that Russia will continue to also challenge the Baltic states. As a matter of fact, Putin doesn't need to roll on tanks and jets there. All he really has to do is to use its hybrid warfare activities there, which he has already been using.
The rise in hybrid operations against EU member states in the Baltic region has prompted a discussion on how the EU should respond to security threats.
Will we find additional money? That is discussion, broader discussion about defense and so on. We shall see. We are looking for some possibilities, but definitely protection of critical infrastructure is part of our preparedness for the whole defense of European continent.
Critical undersea infrastructure is being guarded as part of the Baltic Sentry, a NATO maritime patrol mission intended to deter further incidents.
U.S. President Donald Trump said he held a phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin about ending the war in Ukraine. Now, this is the first known direct conversation between Putin and a U.S. president since the launch of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, in an interview aboard Air Force One on Friday, Trump told the New York Post he had better not say when asked how many times he had spoken to Putin. Putin wants to see people stop dying, Trump added. Now, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov declined to confirm or deny whether such a conversation actually took place. Trump has repeatedly stated his intention to end the war in Ukraine and has expressed a willingness to meet with Putin to discuss a resolution, though the date or location for a potential summit remains unknown. Talks about Ukraine without Ukraine? What's Kyiv's takes on this? Well, let's connect live with our correspondent Oz Chatterjee, who is in the Ukrainian capital right now. Good evening, Oz. So President Volodymyr Zelensky gave an interview today. Did he say anything specific about this conversation between Trump and Putin?
Well, the interview that was published on Saturday was a wide-ranging interview with the British channel ITV News. And he did refer to the president, to US President Donald Trump, but not about the phone conversation that they had. Now, President Zelensky stressed that there couldn't be talks about Ukraine and the war that don't include Ukraine. And he did emphasize the need for security guarantees, saying that if there were no security guarantees in place for Ukraine, that this would only encourage Putin, saying a frozen conflict will lead to Putin coming back again with his aggression. Now, on the US President Donald Trump, President Zelensky did refer to the president, saying he needs to not just finish the war, he needs to make sure that Putin has no chance of coming back with a war against us. So very clear-eyed statements from President Zelensky about what the potential pitfalls could be in any kinds of negotiations with Russia, trying to nip those in the bud by stressing there needs to be the kinds of guarantees that Ukraine is looking for, that Kyiv is looking for, that would deter Russia from any future aggression. I'm not sure that Washington and Kyiv are currently on the same page with that, but President Zelensky is very much certainly hoping to keep going down the diplomatic channel rather than causing any rifts at this current moment in time.
And we'll be able to see if they will actually be able to get on that negotiating table. Thank you so much, Oz Chatterjee, coming to us live from Kyiv. Moving on to Germany now, where Chancellor Olaf Scholz faces off tonight in a TV debate with his conservative rival Friedrich Merz just 2 weeks ahead of the general election. Now, Merz is currently leading in the polls to become the country's next leader, sparked quite the controversy last week by securing support from the far-right AfD party to pass a motion tightening immigration rules. Experts warn that mainstream parties must deliver on migration promises to curb the rise of the AfD. John Todd reports.
Organisers of this anti-AfD demonstration in Munich on Saturday claim up to 320,000 people attended. Waving placards and banners denouncing Nazism, they were also angry with CDU opposition leader Friedrich Merz, who recently proposed legislation on migration similar to that suggested by the AfD.
I'm in favor of sending a signal against the far right. And as the motto says, resist the beginnings. We already experienced that in 1933.
The problem is simply that someone like Friedrich Merz, for example, is increasingly testing the boundaries and seeing what the population will and will not allow. So yes, there really is a big problem everywhere right now. We are here because democracy is important, and so is diversity and peace. And democracy can only work with everyone, except the right. That doesn't work at all.
The Munich protest may have been twice the size of a similar anti-AfD protest in Berlin a week ago. Analysts say many believe the Eurosceptic anti-immigration party has no place in Germany.
They believe that AfD should not be even present in the political on the political scene of Germany, because it is anti-establishment party, but it's also anti-systemic party. And for this kind of political parties, there is even like a constitutional blockade that they should never actually participate in German politics.
Demonstrators also gathered in Bremen in northern Germany. Analysts say if Merz becomes chancellor and is able to make good on migration issues, then this might take the wind out of the AfD's sails.
The issue is whether the new government and with him as a chancellor will be capable of actually passing the law that will be more effective on the policy basis. If so, then this is actually the answer to the surge of AfD in the polls.
There were also warnings that Germany and other countries, including Poland, had to be on guard against election interference.
We should also be very aware and look what is happening in Germany because of our elections that are happening, presidential elections that will be happening very soon. But the issue is with all of that once we focus on the Russian disinformation and Russian influence, of course, there might be also not necessarily a Russian influence into these elections. which is, of course, the huge discussion about Elon Musk and his activities, and whether and to what extent actually the ex-portal can influence the results of the elections.
Expect the rhetoric and potential for interference to increase as election day approaches. Europe will be watching the results intensely.
Europe's far-right leaders gathered in Madrid over the weekend for their annual meeting. And one slogan dominated the agenda: "Make Europe Great Again." Now, the gathering comes as extremist views gain traction within mainstream parties, with voters across the continent preparing to head to the polls. Zuzana Jurek has the story.
Migration policy is out of control, and the bottomless pit of immigration is draining our coffers and filling our prisons.
The message of the French national rally's Marine Le Pen was met with cheers and vivats from fellow far-right European pundits as they gathered in Madrid, Spain. Poland was also represented by Krzysztof Bosak, Deputy Speaker of the Polish Parliament and the leader of the national movement.
We will reject all this EU nonsense like climate policy, European Green Deal, Migrant Compact and much more.
But one message rang to overshadow all others: "Make Europe Great Again." The similarity to US President Donald Trump's tagline is not coincidental. Europe's far right is determined to overrule the Brussels consensus.
Trump's tornado has changed the world in just 2 weeks. An era is over. Yesterday we were the heretics, today we are the mainstream.
Unsurprisingly, the unifying call of all far-right leaders, from Washington through to Madrid, comes in the form of a staunch anti-immigration rhetoric.
Every election that comes to Europe must fall one after the other like dominoes, as if the political game were lining up in an inexorable movement.
We are united by the defense of our borders, because high fences make good neighbors.
And Europeans have much to learn from President Trump, who immediately upon taking office moved to reverse US immigration and asylum-seeking policies, which experts say brings widespread consequences for the post-war status quo.
The United States has been a pillar of the liberal international order for as long as we've known it, in the last 75 or so years.
Observers also point out that the US example might set a precedent in motion with far-reaching effects on EU lawmaking.
Increasing number of deputations, which you can call, if you will, the Trumpization of the migration policy, something which is called euphemistically applying national laws a matter of priority if European regulations do not work, which is basically accepting the possibility of violating EU law.
Though some warn that rallying around US conservatives is likely to bring undesirable effects.
For the Trump administration, this would be a perfect setup if Europe is divided into those very small countries, and Trump can, like he does with Canada, with Panama, with Denmark, can pick and impose his will on each of those small countries.
And the US is not the only democracy where the rejection of Western values is dominating political debate. Intensifying clashes between liberalism and the far right are happening across Europe. From Georgia,
police powers have been widely expanded, ban on temporary structures at all protests have been introduced, and in general we're witnessing the consolidation of authoritarian rule.
to Slovakia, where Prime Minister Fico's meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in late December led to protests in over 40 cities across the country.
What we demand is basically we reject Robert Fico's policies, we reject this attempt by his government to take us closer to Putin's Russia.
And with numerous elections approaching across Europe, from Germany in just a few weeks to Poland's presidential election scheduled for May, voters across the bloc will have to demonstrate a definitive rejection of these sentiments to preserve the unity of the EU.
And moving on now to sports, where the Polish youth Olympic team traveled to Georgia to represent their country at the Youth Winter Olympic Festival. Our reporter Anastasia Yanchenko attended the Olympic oath-taking ceremony and spoke with the young athletes before their departure.
Here they are, the young athletes representing the red and white team this year. This team of 32 athletes from across the country will compete for Poland at the 17th European Youth Olympic Festival. The Polish team will compete in 7 disciplines: biathlon, short track speed skating, cross-country skiing, alpine skiing, figure skating, and freestyle skiing and snowboarding. Famous Polish wrestler and Olympic silver medalist Andrzej Supron spoke at the ceremony, giving the young athletes words of encouragement.
Sport is one of the amazing things to do in the world. I'm so honest I can open this celebration and to shake the hands, to wish them a success. I was 4 times in the Olympics, I get a medal. I was standing on the highest step to get a gold medal, to listen to my anthem. This is the moment of forever.
The athletes took the Olympic oath to abide by the rules and proudly represent their country. For some of them, this is their first participation in a competition at this level.
This is my first competition at such a high level. I feel stressed, but I'm proud to represent Poland.
The athletes have been training intensely for the last 6 months.
We've trained for a long time, especially in the last month. We haven't left the halls or the mountains. We are snowboarders, and everything we do is for the purpose of winning and proudly representing our team.
The young athletes say they spent a lot of time training to qualify and represent Poland at the competition.
I started with that sport when I was 3 years old and just went on, and I really enjoy that sport. Yeah, so basically I was preparing my whole life because I was training my whole life.
The 17th Winter Olympic Festival will be held in the city of Bakuryani in the Georgian mountains from February 9th through 16th. The competition will see 1,000 young athletes from 46 European countries, including Germany, France, Spain and Ukraine. We wish all the athletes good luck and many victories as they set out to achieve their goals.
And now to our main topic this evening. Voters officially cast their ballots in Kosovo in today's highly anticipated parliamentary elections. And while Prime Minister Albin Kurti's party is expected to win the most seats, a majority looks unlikely. And with rising ethnic tensions, mainly with Serbia, and shifting international support, what's next for Kosovo in the region? Joining me now to discuss is Tefta Kelmendi, the Deputy Director at Wider Europe Program at the ECFR. Good evening and welcome to the program.
Good evening.
All right, so before we get into all the details here, give us please an overview of the current election results. I mean, the exit polls, who will form the new government, and the potential implication for Kosovo's political landscape.
Yes, sure. So the first exit polls indeed put the ruling party Vetëvendosje at about 38.2% of the vote, followed by the main opposition party PDK at 22.4% and LDK, the third party, at 20.1%. This definitely allows a room for maneuver between members of the opposition who could now see more opportunity to engage in a negotiation of a coalition of the opposition and form a government potentially without the ruling Vetëvendosje party. But of course, these are just exit polls. We need to still see the official results that will be communicated later.
What do you think, of course, a lack of majority for the Prime Minister Kurti's party? What challenges do you see in possibly being able to form a stable government? What can you say on that?
The ruling party, Vetëvendosje, indeed, during his election campaign, the Prime Minister framed this election himself as a referendum towards him and his popularity. And if we look at it that way, he has, in a way, lost the referendum because he did expect a landslide victory, as he did win 4 years ago at about 50%. This result, if we base it on the exit polls, represents approximately 10% or even 11% loss of the overall vote. In this scenario, and given also the tensions, the political tensions that have emerged in Kosovo, especially in the past 2 to 3 years, I do not believe that it's going to be easy for the ruling party to find a coalition partner that is willing to form a government with them.
What about anticipating the approach that are going to influence relations with Serbia? How do you think that's going to play out?
In a scenario of the opposition parties engaging in a coalition and forming a government without the ruling party, the possibility of the end of a status quo in relation with Serbia, but also resumption of normal relations and close cooperation with the Western allies of Kosovo, which has not been so much the case in the past 2 years, becomes more of a more probable. So, in the case of an opposition-led coalition forming the government, we should be able to see some advancement in relation to dialogue of normalization with Serbia. But of course, this does not depend only on the side of Kosovo. As we know, Serbia needs to play its part in the dialogue as well.
What can you tell me about voter turnout? Was it any different compared to previous elections?
We indeed expected. I mean, the voter turnout is about 10% less than in the previous election, which was surprising, and I wouldn't yet explain why this is the case. I think a lot of people were undecided because this was a very important election, but let's see. It's still important that maybe there will be change in Kosovo.
What is the likelihood of Kosovo advancing in its EU integration process? Is there anything we know about this?
For Kosovo to advance its EU integration process, there is several conditions to be met. First of all, Kosovo needs to resume its relationships with its key allies and partners in Europe and try to resume talks on fulfilling full recognition from the EU, meaning the 5 EU countries that do not recognize Kosovo. This is precondition for Kosovo to become a candidate country and therefore begin its process of accession to the EU. And this is particularly relevant from the side of the EU to make a difference in Kosovo. If there is indeed a new government which is more cooperative and willing to also advance the dialogue with Serbia, the EU should consider moving also from its own position towards supporting Kosovo's full recognition within the EU and allowing Kosovo to become a member, a candidate country like the others. Of course, we are not there yet, but this election result could also present an opportunity for the EU to change its policy and adapt it vis-à-vis Kosovo.
Tefta, let me ask you this. Poland has expressed concerns about the Russian influence in the region, especially, of course, ahead of its own presidential elections shortly. What role do you see, if any, Russia playing in the current political dynamics in Kosovo?
Russia is interested to maintain a region in perpetual crisis with unresolved conflicts to prevent its integration into the EU. This has been Russia's policy for the region for the past 3 or so decades. This has not necessarily changed. In this particular election in Kosovo, there has not been at least no known case, identifiable effort by Russia to engage in some form of hybrid activity to influence this election.
And just very briefly, what key challenges do you think that Kosovo's new government is going to have to tackle in being able to balance domestic priorities with international expectations?
The key and the biggest challenge that this new government will be facing is, first of all, needs to find a political stability in the framework of a coalition, but this coalition culture in Kosovo exists. In the past, governments have usually been a result of coalition of various political parties, but political stability comes first. Second, the biggest challenge will remain dialogue with Serbia, especially implementation of the agreement reached in Brussels in 2023, specifically related to the rights of the Serb community in the north of the country. This is and has been a politically delicate topic in Kosovo among all political parties, but in the case of a coalition, it could be easier to agree on the implementation as it represents a shared political responsibility in one way or the other. President Trump's uncertain policy towards the region represents a second challenge. The Kosovo relies on the U.S. for its security. it relies in the US for further achieving full international recognition. It will be difficult but challenging, but possible to resume, to ensure that the US remains engaged in Kosovo.
Thank you so much, Tefta Kelmendi. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your insights on the elections that are the exit polls have now done in Kosovo. Thanks for being with us here on TVP World.
Thank you.
And that's all for this edition of World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more here on TVP World.